Hello, everyone. Today, unfortunately, is another painful day in Israel. We're in the heart of this multi-frontal war. I think it's very clear. There were 3 surface-to-surface missiles that targeted Tel Aviv and the whole central Israel today, with around 200 cities and communities that had to run to safe shelters, including our employees. Soldiers continue to be killed. Just now, there was an announcement in Israel of another 19-year-old who was killed in Gaza. Relatives of ELNET employees are also being killed. And it's something that I think we should all be very aware of, that it's all hitting close to home. You all know about this terrible event that took place yesterday in Binyamina, Hezbollah killer drone that bombarded a military base, unfortunately, successfully, and led to 67 soldiers injured, 4 soldiers killed in the Golani Brigade. And at the same time, you see the strategic events coming to a head with the American THAAD missile defense system being deployed in Israel operationally for the first time in history. And what this means, this is part of the larger American and coalition framework that is being deployed to the Middle East as we speak, in preparation for an imminent Israeli counter response to the second Iranian attack on Israel. And of course, the anticipation of an Iranian attack in retaliation for that. So we are in a regional event. This is not just about Israel. This goes way beyond Israel. It's about American forces in the region. It's about the energy supply, which is global. It's about Iranian threats to attack Saudi Arabia and other Gulf energy resources. We're in the heart of it, as we say, in the thick of a multi-frontal campaign against Israel that is nowhere near an end. And what this means is that we need to do everything we can to protect Israel, to protect the Israeli people, and to make sure that there is an international coalition that is as robust as we can help make it in the days and weeks and months ahead, that will be very critical for the history of the Middle East and certainly for the security of Israel and the people of Israel. So without further ado, the stakes are very high. We're towards the end of the year. Please support ELNET with what you can as we go through this together. I am now passing it on to Mark Sachs, who is our Southeast Director for ELNET US. Mark, the floor is yours to introduce our speaker and topic. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Ambassador Doru Costea. Ambassador Costea served in Romania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 1990 to 2017, where he played key roles in the Middle East and North Africa, Africa region. And during his diplomatic career, Ambassador Costea was ambassador to Kuwait, Oman, Egypt, China, Mongolia, and the UN, where he became the first representative of an EU member state to be elected president of the EU Human Rights Council. Ambassador Costea, after retiring, joined the Aspen Institute Romania Strategic Group and the Scientific Council of the Bucharest New Strategy Center, and remains an active participant, lecturer, and panelist today. He is fluent in Arabic, English, and French, and holds a PhD in political science focused on democracy building in the Middle East. Ambassador, it is really a pleasure to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation you and I will engage in. I think before we start, I think it'll be helpful because, to be honest, I don't know that many of our attendees today are that familiar with Romania and perhaps the history of Romania-Israel relationships. So I'd like to point out a few interesting tidbits that I found helpful. Romania was among the first countries in the world to recognize the state of Israel on June 14. That's less than a month after Israel declared its statehood. And during the Cold War, Romania was the only country within the Soviet Union to maintain diplomatic relationships with Israel. And in 2024, earlier this year, the Romanian parliament adopted a law to establish May 14th as the National Day of Friendship and Solidarity between Romania and the State of Israel. And according to the law, each year on May 14th, diplomatic, political, cultural, social, and artistic events will be organized, and materials dedicated to the history and promotion of the bilateral Romanian-Israeli relations. So that's quite a remarkable history, Ambassador. I'd like to ask you on that note, why have Romania and Israel been able to maintain such strong relationships for nearly 80 years? And where do you think that relationship is likely to go over the next decade?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, all of you, for having me at this meeting and allow me to share the thoughts and compassion I feel myself for the horrendous hours that our Israeli friends are living as we speak. I'm saying that not as a diplomatic courtesy. I visited Israel several times. I walked on the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and I saw places that had been bombed a couple of days before my visits there back in the early 90s and late 2000s. And I have many friends there, including extremely able diplomats I had the opportunity to meet, like Ambassador Zvi Mazel in Egypt. We were together there, or the late Itzhak Lebanon in Geneva. So I may say that I have a special relationship with Israel without having worked there. I wish I had. Well, I didn't. That's life. But with this leads me to the second point, and I'll be a little bit short, because you mentioned Mark. May I call you Mark?
You may.
Thank
of course.
You. All right. My name is Doru then. So you mentioned several highlights in the history of Romanian-Israeli relationship. Of course, they go much further back in history. Some first historical references to Jews and Romanians go back to the 16th century, but they were very fragmented. The real relationship, so to speak, began in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, following particularly the developments and the persecutions of the Jews in the eastern part of Europe, particularly in Russia and elsewhere around us. So they came here. At one time, by mid-19th century, in the eastern part of Romania, which is called Moldova, you know the Republic of Moldova. Well, that part is half of the historic Moldova. The other half is in Romania. There were some 12% of the population that were of Jewish origin. And that's around 190,000 individuals, which was not a small number. But history has ups and downs. And so has the history of our relationship. Actually, the history of our two peoples has ups and downs. And among them, we mentioned, it is to be mentioned, the history of the Second World War, when quite a large number of Jews fall victim to the Holocaust in Romania, some half of the population, of the Jewish population, around 380,000 by some accounts. So that there are some 400,000 by some statistics, Jews in Israel that are of Romanian descent. And that makes it quite a sizable community. We are very proud to have among them representatives of high level, including the present-day ambassador to Bucharest, whose parents were both born in Romania. So it was, I had the privilege of meeting him the other day, and it was a very, we are very happy that he's here. He just started his mission. Two other things. First, you mentioned the day that was established by the Parliament to celebrate the history of our relationship. I would add that in 2004, Romania decided to mark the National Day of the Holocaust on the 8th of October every year. Likewise, elements or information about the Holocaust were introduced in the curricula for the elementary school back in 1998. And now there is a special class for the high school in Romania on the history of Jews and the Holocaust. This is an acknowledging the history and assuming history. And I think this is something that helped the our Jewish friends consider us in a slightly different light than had it not been so, had these decisions not been taken. There are also very many cultural links. For instance, I didn't know, I have just found, while preparing for this meeting, that the father of the Jewish modern theater, Abraham Goldfeld, established the first Yiddish-speaking theater in the world in Bucharest. So that's quite something. But it means something else. Perhaps this is my own idea, but I have a feeling that there is something very deep in our own mentality, our own psychology. I mean, when I say our, I mean both Romanian and Israeli, which helped us survive in a not so friendly environment, to put it mildly, very mildly. You cannot, I don't compare the history of Romania and the Romanians and the history of the Jews, but we had all the time something to reject or to resist. And I have a very perhaps superficial parallel to draw here. You know, we are the only Latin people in what is called a sea of Slavic peoples. We are all our relatives, all our cousins are in the West. French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romance in Switzerland. These are the Romance languages, and Romania belongs to them. So we don't have relatives around here. Well, mutatis mutandis is somehow, like Israel feels, surrounded by a population, a civilization, and a culture that has been, let's say, contradictory to them, to put it mildly. Perhaps this helped. We learned how to survive. You survived. We learned how important it is to keep the cultural relationship, to keep our so-called abstract relationship very tight. And we do it. There is a very active flow of people traveling between Bucharest and Tel Aviv every week. So, and we hope that in a short period of time, we'll have an even more number of tourists from Israel to Romania, while Romanians travel regularly to Israel. And of course, business is developing even more under these circumstances in vital sectors like defense, for instance. So this is the second part of the answer. The future of this relationship, I think, is under a very good omen, and it could develop. What we need more, because we need to focus on job at hand, is to have a more active, more intense relationship between outfits like ELNET and our think tanks, particularly New Strategy Center that I am with right now, because it is one of the most important ways to spread knowledge and information from the horse's mouths, so to speak. When we meet, even be it like on Zoom, we talk to people that are living what they are telling us. It's not like reading a very good analysis in foreign affairs or in Haaretz or in wherever, but which is mediated. It's not the one to look in his eyes and feel differently. So this would be to the better. We know what communication and dialogue means. Last point, because it brings us to the very reality of today. You mentioned the political diplomatic relationship between Romania and Israel in the past. Well, it was us who, it was admitted. It's not us who brag about that, but it was admitted by others that Romania played a very important role in Anwar Sadat's visit to Jerusalem. And that visit opened a new chapter in the history of the region and in the history of the world. How that chapter developed is another story. But if it had not been that, I think we can agree things would have been much more difficult than they are today. That's it. Sorry,
so we're going to get into that strategic dialogue and the advancement of strategic dialogue and some of the bigger issues and where you think this dialogue can take us in the future as we deal with mutual threats. But before we get down the path too far, and we will get there, I want to revisit the subject of today's call, which is the Human Rights Council. Now, you served as president of the council from 2000 to 2008. I think that was a year after the Human Rights Council had been established. So I think it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on what were the initial expectations of the council when it was conceived? How do you think it's been successful? And how do you think it has failed since its inception, your time there?
Indeed, I was chair of the Human Rights Council in the second year of its existence. In the first year, we had one point on the agenda only, and that was the institutional building of the council. Because the council replaced the Commission on Human Rights, which was one of the first UN bodies. It was set up in 1946, so 1 year after the birth of the UN. And it had a very tumultuous history, this commission. It was considered that something new is needed because things had changed a lot, which was true. And it was also expected that the new format, which is a Swiss initiative, would be a contribution to strengthening one of the three pillars of the UN, and that is the second pillar, which is human rights. The first pillar is peace and security. The third pillar is development. So human rights were supposed to be enforced, strengthened, better, more efficiently promoted and defended by the birth of this new council. In one word, when I took over the presidency, the chair for my predecessor was the Mexican permanent representative, Mr. Alfonso de Alba. The council had achieved more than it had been expected and less than it had been hoped for, which is quite confusing. It means that what it has succeeded in my view, even after my mandate finished, and looking at what the council had and how the council has acted ever since, I think it has succeeded in developing one of the most important components of its activity, a dialogue between states and non-state actors, the famous NGOs. I am, without modesty, one of the artisans of this dialogue. During my presidency, I managed to stick to allowing NGOs to have a certain slot in the official formal debates and to have a contribution to another instrument that was a first in the history of the UN. And that instrument is the Universal Periodic Review that you are, of course, aware of. I'll come back to it in a moment. I insist on the NGO performance because among the NGOs in the human rights field, some of the most active, efficient, and respected NGOs are those that deal with issues pertaining to the Middle East. And the Middle East was one of the issues that the Council failed in tackling. And this is, I said, the first was an achievement, and here we come to a failure. And that is the agenda of the Council. The agenda of the Council, which is the same all over, every session, doesn't change, kept a point that deals only with the situation in the Middle East, with Israel. And that was inherited from the agenda of the Commission. Keeping it on the agenda was on the point of blocking the birth of the Human Rights Council. The General Assembly, the resolution that founded the Human Rights Council, was adopted by the General Assembly, Resolution 60/251. It was supposed to be the council was supposed to be formed in 1 year, between 6th of June 2006 and 9th of June 2006 and 8th of June 2007. By 8th of June 2007, at 23:55 hours, the president stopped the clock because we had not agreed on this particular point on the agenda. And it took us 2 hours of close consultations and very active other discrete communications to finally succeed in adopting the agenda, albeit with the separate item that is dedicated to the Human Rights Council. It was considered that it was better to have an agenda, even if flawed, than to have no council at all, because the Commission had been disbanded, and therefore there would have been no other body, standing body of the UN, to deal with the human rights. On the plus side, I mentioned the universal peer review. It was a mechanism that I had the privilege of setting in motion in the second year after an arduous work carried out by colleagues of mine in the previous year. And it is worth mentioning that one of the most efficient architects was the Morocco permanent representative as a facilitator in the negotiations. The universal peer review calls all the states members of the UN to introduce a report on the human rights condition in front of the Council every 4.5 years. There are recommendations, and they are kept on a sort of enforcement list. The next session, you will be presented with what the Council thinks about what you've done with the recommendations that you have been given. A similar mechanism exists with the WTO only, as far as I know. There are no other such multilateral mechanisms in the whole multilateral system. And it was considered a breakthrough because the states were held accountable for their own commitments, one, and two, because in the report they were supposed to introduce to the members of the Council, the NGOs had a particular share. Their participation was mandatory. That decision took a long time to be accepted, but it was accepted at the end. And the situation, this mechanism allows for better learning the realities in a country or another, and to have people and the representatives of the public to give them the opportunity to take the floor in the Council. The meetings are open, they are broadcast, so it is an opportunity to have a promoting method and weapon for the observance of human rights.
I'm sorry, I thought you were pausing for a moment.
No. These are the most important things, I would say.
Got it. So let me revisit. The failure in tackling the Middle East, the opportunity of being open. There's some opportunities for the UN Human Rights Council to advance, hopefully, some good things. But let's also tackle the obvious, and that is there are currently 193 members of the UN General Assembly, 43 of which are elected to the UN Human Rights Council. Only 14 of those countries, 14 of the 43 that sit on the council, are democracies. Now, there's not 100% correlation between being a non-democracy and human rights violations, but there is a high correlation between being a non-democratic country and having human rights violations. That's kind of like, well, let's say if Iran and Syria can share the committee and China is regularly reelected to the committee, that's like having prisoners guard the prison. What is the compelling reason that democratic countries should continue to participate on the UN Human Rights Council?
That's a very valid question and a very strong one. I'll try to respond to it to the extent of my capabilities. Just a small footnote. I think the number of the members of the Human Rights Council is 47, not 43.
Okay.
But it's just a detail. You are extremely right here, and particularly when you mention a certain relationship between the democratic character of a country and the respect of human rights. This makes me put forward a topic that perhaps might be addressed on with another occasion. In my mind, democracy is a goal of an unending process. It is not something you said, okay, look and behold, we have built democracy. Thank you very much. Let's go home. It's not that. The next day, democracy falls back to authoritarianism, to the rule of law is trampled under feet. Minorities are discriminated against, and so on and so forth. It means that democracy is a topic, is a goal, an aim that is somehow like the horizon. You never reach it. The minute you think, all right, I've reached it, there is another one in front of you, and then another one. To be less metaphorical, it is something that needs to be aimed at and kept safe and defended and improved and adapted continuously because conditions and circumstances around you change. Just think about what the social media does to democracy, what artificial intelligence may do and does to democratic exercise. And we would realize that we need to think how to deal with it. Because this is when Mrs. Roosevelt put forward the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, there was not such a thing in the world. So this year, almost 4 billion people voted in their countries. It is the biggest amount of votes in the history since voting was implemented wherever and whenever. 1 out of 3 people who voted lived in countries where liberty has been in decline. Now that is a problem. Why? Perhaps because we thought that, all right, with their democracy, it was all right in the 80s, particularly in the 90s, what with the end of the Cold War and the background. So we've done it. We are winners. And then we forgot how and if we ever knew what to do with the victory and how to keep it and how to develop the results according to our own values. And we neglected that. The result, the other side, so to speak, flourished and grew. And now we have a problem. Although we know that what we mean is right, and most probably the public in those countries knows also that what we mean is right. But when they look at what's going on in some of our own countries, they say, hey, that's democracy. So what's the difference? So here actually lies the answer to your question. Because by isolating those countries, in my view, would empower them to band together and increase their strength and influence. Whereas by being in a body like Human Rights Council, which is far from perfect, but it allows for a tool to be used, as I said before, in order to expose the abuses and injustice on one hand, and on the other hand, and perhaps this is even at least equally important, to prove that what we do is the right thing. Look, we know we have problems, we know we have a discrimination, we know we are not perfect, but we acknowledge them, we assume them, and we act accordingly. The result is that we are better living than you are. Of course, I oversimplify things. But this is, to my mind, engaging in the issue has more chances to settle the issue than rejecting it and shutting the door in front of anybody else. Sorry.
Fair enough. I appreciate the response. And before I get to the next question, I want to remind everybody, if you do have a question, please, the chat, Sia will post the chat again, but by all means, send in your questions. So let's acknowledge it's an imperfect entity, perhaps an important but imperfect entity. Now, if we characterize, say, three categories for countries: those that are democracies and doing an okay but imperfect job, those that are aspiring to be but not quite there, and those who are working against democracy but happen to be involved in this enterprise, meaning the UN and the UN Human Rights Council. If you could reform, and Haiti right now is undergoing a significant and tumultuous time. I think it was 70 innocents were just murdered not too long ago. I think it was last week by gangs. China certainly engaged with the Uyghurs, and you could go country by country dealing with human rights violations, none of which seem to be addressed very well by the international community. If you could reform the Human Rights Council to make it less imperfect, what would you recommend?
There is a process with the Council, which is the review of the Council. It is mandatory every 4 years and a half or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. The Council needs to sit back and look at itself and see, well, what have I done so far and what is to be done from now on. On paper, it looks fabulous. In reality, things are not that fabulous. One reason is that, be it as it, delete that. Human rights are a political issue. Although there are two components, the political rights and the economic and social component, right? There are two documents. And we know that some countries, led by China, but not only China, put the economic rights in front or before the political rights. So there is a hierarchy in their view. Give people enough to eat, and then we will give them the freedom of speech. Again, I simplify things, but this is the core of the message. Whereas in our view, we say you cannot differentiate one from the other. They go together. We separated them in order to better approach them. It was an attempt to systematize, to organize the job. Otherwise, it's not possible. It's too big. You need to slice it and have it addressed accordingly. So, even if we agree to that, they are highly political. Therefore, the decision belongs to the political authorities. In every state, I'm going to say some very elementary things, and obvious things. But you remember, Schumpeter said that the most treacherous thing is the obvious. So you have the state and you have the public. The relationship and the interaction between them leads to the state, the status and the situation of democracy. When you try to make the state take a political decision, the first thing they will do is to look at what it costs them with their own public. And therefore, they will act accordingly. You cannot force a state to take a political decision by political statements only. So this is perhaps one of the most sensitive and crucial goals I would set for a review process of the human rights enforcement, because what is written in the decisions is fine. The way in which what is written is implemented is a totally another matter. Why? Because only by calling it to introduce a report in the Universal Periodic Review is not enough. You need to do something else, more. But this is a flaw of the UN system in general. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the only mandatory resolutions of the UN are those taken by the by the Security Council. I don't need to tell you how these resolutions are observed.
Indeed.
So this is the point that I would very much like to to reform. It is a specific job, but it takes the longest, the job that's never started, as somebody in a book said.
Okay, let's fast forward this now to ELNET strategic dialogue for Central and Eastern Europe, held in Riga. That, well, we're going to talk about the strategic dialogue and the advancement of that, but you recently attended ELNET CEE strategic dialogue in Riga, Latvia. And I have to assume, since I wasn't there, that Russia, Iran, and China were all topics of conversation. How would you assess the threats from each to both Europe and Israel? And what do you think are the most pressing actions that Europe must take to ameliorate those threats, either in coordination with Israel or separately?
All right, so there are 2 points. Point number one, the meeting in Riga was a first for me. And it was also something that made me very happy. You know, everybody is very happy when they find they are right. So it confirmed what I had said at the very beginning, the importance of talking to people that come from the place. And because they know what they are talking about, they have lived it, and they are credible. And particularly the friends in the ELNET network and those that I met, some of them I had known. I had met 2 years ago, I think. So I knew what was to expect from them to a large extent. It was very educational for me as a person to learn how things are interpreted and considered from others in our region. We talk among themselves, not enough, I reckon. But it is even more important to listen to that, because at the end of the day, you live some 2,000 kilometers away. I mean, our Israel. No, I think you live a little bit further. But the others are 1 hour and a half away from us by plane. So, and we are in the first line, because you mentioned Russia. And we, Romania, are not very that far from the first line when you look at the map for the Middle East. We are the closest, bar the Bulgarians, from this area. The threats that you mentioned, the origins of the threats that you mentioned, are indeed those three that you alluded to. I think that the accent in this meeting was put on Iran, understandably, very much, and no need to develop this, why and how. And I also think that from my own point of view, and I forgot to mention, apologies, everything I said are my own personal opinions and views. I do not represent anybody here but myself, not even the New Strategy Center that I'm with now. So, in my own very personal view, in order to be efficient, these threats need to be addressed collectively. One by one is what they want, particularly China. China is a master of divide and impera. The way it deals with the EU, for instance, is a textbook tool, a textbook method. They agree with Commission, they salute the development of dialogue between China and the Commission, and they work with the member states bilaterally. So it is a sort of bilateral multilateralism, if I may put forward such a barbaric sentence. It is not mine, by the way. It was an American analyst who coined it. I liked it very much. So if we take it one by one, we don't stand a chance. Even if Iran is not that big power, it's not China. Iran is not Russia, but it is closer and more dangerous physically, as we have seen by with the help of the proxies. Therefore, we need to act together. In order to act together, we need to learn from each other. How do you see that? Why do you see what you see this way and not another way? What are you planning to do? Are you sure it's all right that? Perhaps from where I stand, I see things that maybe you just didn't give enough attention to, or just didn't think about. Normal. It's normal. As we may have ignored obvious things because we don't live there. So you tell them, and we change our mind. So communication among ourselves, and agree on what we need, what is in the best interests of all of us. And here I think lies the rub. What the best is for our interests must necessarily and compulsorily be on the long term. And this is perhaps a reflection of the fact that many of the conflicts we are living today elsewhere, not only in the Middle East, but particularly in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine war. So most of the causes of these conflicts are unsolved conflicts that somehow were either mitigated, everybody got accustomed to managing crisis instead of solving crisis. So, and now the crises are no longer manageable the way they used to be. Last point, which is very provocative, and I mean to be provocative. We need to agree whether the crises that we're living today are similar, and to what extent, to previous crises. Because we, by nature, think by comparing. It looks like the big depression in the late 20s. Everybody said so when the crisis hit in 2007. It's like that. It's not like that, but very close to that. So they thought along the same lines. If this worked then under conditions A, B, C, and now we have conditions A, B, C, we have the solutions. Implement them, and it doesn't work. So it means that we need necessarily to review our methods. Perhaps we need something else. Not only what we used to be, something else again. And one of the issues, perhaps one of the ways, is that better information, more communication, more aggressiveness in spreading information would be helpful. And but this is just on the top of my head. It needs to be very carefully examined, because if, sorry to be so blunt, but if today, this night, we go to the valiant soldiers of the IDF and they say, hey, we need to rethink, let's, hold on, don't shoot anymore because you don't know who you kill, let's think a bit. They would say, what? After they just killed those comrades of ours yesterday? So it is extremely difficult. But leaving it like that won't solve it. So threats are new. The circumstances are new. Drones. How many drones were there in the 1967 war? Or in the 1973 war? And now you have thousands a day. I just took an example. So crises are under new circumstances. Their tools are different. We need to adapt our thinking to those tools. And one of them is to stick together, to talk together, in order to better understand and empathize. Otherwise, we'll fall into traps. And
in support of your point, I just completed one of H.R. McMaster's book, and he was the national security advisor under Trump. And throughout his book, he articulated the dangers of China's bilateral multilateralism, and how effective China is at separating the herd and picking off the vulnerable. So it's a very intriguing point that you bring up, and an apt one. Before we go into questions, and we'll have some time for some questions, I do want to offer a comment on behalf of ELNET. As everyone likely knows, ELNET's mission is to broaden and deepen defense, diplomatic, economic, and intelligence relationships between Europe and Israel. And we have seen the efficacy of our efforts over the past year. I wish I could say mission accomplished. I wish I could say all's well in the world. Wish I could say all's well in Europe, in the United States, in the Middle East, and Israel. But I can't. In fact, our work has probably never been more important than it is right now. The U.S. is sending THAAD missile defense systems and 100 soldiers to Israel. It has never done that in history. It testifies to the dangers ahead for the Western alliance following Israel's likely response to the Iranian attack. The UK, France, Cyprus, and others are likely to be called on again to defend Israel's skies. The US will hold elections in just 20 days. Regardless who wins, there are going to be big questions about what each administration would mean for Europe and Israel. We at ELNET, however, believe the answers to those questions will demand greater cooperation on shared threats and opportunities between Europe and Israel. We have 6 delegations and two more strategic dialogues taking place through the end of the year, and we're already planning for next year, if you believe, like we do, that Europe is essential to Israel's long-term security, then please support our work with a tax-deductible contribution. Every $5,000 we raise sends a member of parliament to Israel for a life-changing experience. As of now, there are more than 100 new members of just the European Parliament who should have a relationship with Israel. With your help, we can make that happen. Okay, so now to questions. Okay, one question we have is regarding the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. The name itself seems highly prejudicial. And the most recent and past rapporteurs have all been extremely critical of Israel, if not downright anti-Semitic. Could you comment on that, please? What's the purpose of that role, and do you think it has any value given the nature of the people who are occupying it?
Well, I'm afraid I can't comment too much on the person per se. I know a little bit more about the mechanism because the special procedures and special rapporteurs were among the most difficult topics we had to solve during the first 2 years of the Council. I have never seen in all my almost 30 years of diplomatic activity more passions and more tension and more biased attitudes in addressing a topic than with these special rapporteurs, particularly when it is about sensitive problems, sensitive issues. When it is about countries, it is even more difficult. And I take pride in telling you that when the special report, when the Socialist Republic, when Romania was under the scrutinizing examination of special rapporteurs, we were the first among the newly democratic countries to invite them to Romania. The others did not invite them. They dragged their feet because we sort of understood what the point was. Now, in this particular case for the Middle East, it is, to my mind, a proof of how a very complicated problem is addressed in the most inefficient way possible. Because the human rights mission is not to solve the conflict in the Middle East. It is not the Human Rights Mission Council responsibility to find a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem. It's not the Council. But everybody pushes this issue to the Human Rights Council. Why? My personal explanation, and I told that when I was in Geneva, and I told that to my colleagues in the EU and to my Israeli friend, unfortunately he's no longer with us, this is on purpose, because it is a hot potato the Security Council is sick of addressing, and it throws it elsewhere while keeping an eye on it, because members of the Security Council, the P5 I mean, are always present in the Council, not all of them at the same time, and they can't stay with the Human Rights Council a perpetuité. They have only 2 mandates. So after 2 mandates, consecutive mandates, they cannot run for re-election. That's only 8 years. So again, the human rights is a political issue. The conflict is a political issue, but not only. And you try to solve it by means of what? What is your contribution to that? And in many cases, it is the special rapporteur is seen as a sort of I think the term is ancillary tool, an annex, right? Something you just keep.
That sounds right.
And every now and then you use it, not constantly, but who knows? It's good to have it, and this is by design. The result is that nothing is happening. In most of the cases, very rarely, there has been a positive response on behalf of both sides, by the way, because Israeli authorities every now and then were cooperative up to a point. Then the Palestinians were cooperative up to a point, and then everything fell apart. So it's a waste of money.
Okay, on that note, Doru, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. Next week, we have Dr. Jacques Gauthier, a Canadian international law expert who will be speaking on the briefing. Again, Doru, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. The same.
Bye, everybody.
Same to you.